Back again for another video. On today's topic, we'll be talking about another form of the duality of women and how it exists. So I wanted to go over this one and the way of how men exist. The overall rhetoric that women have, if you really pay attention to it, even maybe your own woman or maybe women they operate in such a dual state of mind. Sometimes these dual states are complementary of each other, but a lot of times, most times, when you're dealing with a dysfunctional female, the duality that exists within her is dysfunctional. What else can you expect from a woman who has two things that are diametrically opposed to produce? It's going to produce chaos. It's going to produce dysfunctions. But sometimes there are women who want the duality of a man that is functional. For instance, she could want a very masculine and dominant man that adheres to rules, that has a specific guideline of how he rules over his own life, but also want a man who is very loose and who is very unstructured in the bedroom. This is a functional duality in my opinion, because obviously this is how I exist. Though, with my women, I do practice a certain level of restraint nonetheless. So, all that stuff is definitely earned, but nonetheless, this is somewhat what is desired out here, the duality of men in that regard. But there are other forms of duality in men that women expect that are chaotic. For instance, she expects for you to be someone that she likes for a reason and someone that she doesn't like for a reason. I couldn't say necessarily an expectation, but that's what you will become for chaotic women. You will become something that she likes and something that she hates, all for the same reason. Because once again, we're talking about the duality and existence of certain women. Now, I haven't dealt with many other races of women, though I have. We talk about this on my channel, but for the most part, when it comes to the women that I've dealt with, they have either actually the majority of women that I've dealt with, to be realistic with you, and it's so strange. Now that I look back to it in retrospect, they have been Latina. They have either Afro Latina or European Latina, which would be considered in a technical sense a white girl, but they're a little different. And if you have been with one for any stretch of time, then you would know exactly what I'm talking about. They're not your regular white girl per se. But that's been the majority, to be honest with you. But I have dealt with the second largest portion of the population that I've dealt with in regards to the women have been black women. Of course. I grew up in the hood, right? We're all in this together, right? But it has been relatively, once again, black women. And throughout the relationships that I had with black women and, the Latina women, there is correlations to be made. This isn't one thing or the other, but I notice there's a difference between some of the dysfunctional states that these individual sections of women have that are they appear very differently from other sections of women. Not to say that one woman's dysfunction is greater or less than another, but the duality, remember, because that's what we're talking about, the duality and how it exists is a little different. But I want to talk more specifically about BWs, because while this is not the majority of the women that I have dated, it is, to my knowledge, to my experience, is one of the most extreme. And I don't mean extreme necessarily in a bad way, but extreme as in how far apart the dualities are. For instance, like I said, within myself, I'm a dominant man who operates largely on structure. There are parts of my life that are very unstructured, believe me, but largely I operate on structure. But when it comes to me expressing my freedom in sexuality, it can be very unstructured, very, very unstructured, very spontaneous, and different ways, but I give the structure to the women who can handle it, I guess you can say. And for the women who love it, they love me as a dominant, that's just the way it is. But nonetheless, these are still within the scope of direction, meaning that I am the one perpetuating this. I am the one who is the dominant once again. So it's still within the scope, even though the dualities of how they exist are in opposition to structure and unstructured. You know what I mean? How they exist, rather, to be structured and unstructured. But what I notice with is some Latina women, they're a little bit more closer with their extremes, but the BWs, they're further with their extremes. And I'm not going to necessarily say this is because of levels of dysfunction, because believe me, the Latinas, they got dysfunction as well. But I would say rather this is a different type of social grooming. This is a different type of program that was placed upon the BW. And that's just the way it is. But nonetheless, I think that's going to be the center focus of what I'm going to discuss here, because it's the most extreme from my personal experience. And I'm sure other men can possibly attest to this, even though that they may have dated different types of women who wanted a dysfunctional duality. If you dated the BW, the extremes are more pronounced. And once again, this isn't to say, once again, that there's something wrong with it. For instance, a woman could want a really rich man, BW could want a really rich man or a very poor man. That is really extreme, and that doesn't denote that necessarily her dysfunction is greater than, I don't know, a woman who wants a nice guy who is a venture seeker, like there's no comparison in regards to extremes. But anyways, now that I've bored you enough, right? When it comes to the duality of the BW, it is once again, I'll put it back in the front, it is once again extreme. It is very extreme. And due to this duality, her extremities of why she likes you and why she'll hate you will usually be along the same threads. They'll be along the same guidelines. That's the whole reason why I'm actually discussing this, is to indicate to you all that the level of extremes that a woman will go through, no matter what type of woman she is, that level of extreme will manifest itself also through her like and dislike of you. And if it has a identifier of being dysfunctionally based, then you can expect that the duality that exists, that she likes and dislikes you, will also be based off of dysfunction. Hopefully you're keeping up with what I'm saying. I don't want to jumble it around. And if you have any questions, definitely leave a comment and I'll explain further. But once again, I think my listeners are pretty intelligent people, so we rarely have conversations about what I meant. But if you do have any questions, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not intelligent, but that you may need some clarification on something that I said. But anyways, moving along. When it comes to the duality, once again, the dislike and dislike will be giving almost the same energy. For instance, she could love that you are passionate about being an artist. She can love the artwork that you come up with. She can love the way that you do it like no one else does it. and the amount of time and effort that you put into these things. But if ever the relationship goes down, usually because of the dysfunction that she has within herself, she will also use these very same things against you again. But it won't be in a way that you expect most times. And I think for most men, it's not in the way that you identify as being a duality, but it is if you pay attention. She will say how, you think you're so much better of an artist than maybe she is, or someone else that she knows, or how you spend so much time on your artwork and rarely any time with her, or whatever the case may be. She'll find something to have a complaint about, and she will have that same level of energy because of the dysfunction as which that she liked it as she dislikes it. I don't know if you guys have seen this before, but I've seen it many of times because majority of women have some level of dysfunction with them, so it's unavoidable. But if she's using that dysfunction to identify herself in her life, which most women are, she is also going to use that dysfunction to draw and repel against you. It's unfortunate because men, we understand, and I would hope you understand as a man, that if she did not have this dysfunction, you realize that none of these things would be going on, and that she could wholeheartedly appreciate you with the proper and appropriate energy. And she could dislike some things with the proper and appropriate energy. But since most times women become their dysfunction, even though they still stand outside of it, it becomes their forefront person. They don't put a lot of energy into building the core up of who they are. They put the energy towards building the dysfunction to be a functional dysfunction. I don't know if I discussed that before, but it's usually a dysfunction that you can have, that you can still get by with. We call this sometimes, if we want to contrast and compare, it would be if you were dealing with someone who was on drugs, it would be the equivalent of a functioning addict. And this is how most women are. They are pretty much functioning addicts of their own dysfunction. They understand that this is a problem. I've ran across plenty of girls up front that will tell you that they're crazy. It is a badge of honor these days because it is so prevalent. I wouldn't necessarily say of honor. I guess it is something that isn't worth hiding. They no longer have any chastity and civility. They don't have any decorum for the most part. They don't have any willpower to change themselves. So they just accept it and they perpetuate it by speaking it further into existence in acknowledgement and in the unwillingness to change it. This is how it exists. So it's almost like a 90% chance that the woman that you're dealing with is one who is going to go through the duality of extremes in regards, especially like I said, if she's a BW, she's going to go through the duality of the extremes in regards to your existence with her. And the reason why this is because there's a specialized programming specifically for BWs and those associated very closely to them, such as Afro-Latinas and mixed women, who else? Those section of women. But it's not guaranteed. Once again, like I said, this is just a 90% chance. There are roughly about 10% of women out there, in my belief, in my own assertion, for lack of better words, that have the level of duality that is very functional because they do not operate mainly in their dysfunction. But this can be corrected. This all can be corrected. The unfortunate part, once again, is that women do not want to do the work. They don't want to do the work, even though they see that they are the common denominators and why their relationships fail. They do not accept that as a challenge. They just accept it. And what I mean by accepting it as a challenge, meaning that they are going to challenge themselves to no longer be the common denominator in the reason of why their relationships fail, meaning that they are going to make a choice, not a selection, to a man of a man and stick with that. And they are going to work through their issues. They're going to work to correct themselves. I suggest for most women who understand themselves to be quote unquote crazy to work on themselves very greatly before they get into relationships. And of course, we know the running theme here is to seek therapy, but there are other things that you can do. Come to terms with who you are to the point where you don't like it. I think women, so long as they lean on the acceptance of simps, that they will always validate their dysfunction as being appropriate, because there will be some man out there who will deal with it, right? But the issue that women don't pay attention to is because is that these things are very short-lived. These relationships, the man who will accept it, he's short-lived because he only accepts it because you put a battery in his back behind vagina. That's the reason why he accepts it. That's the reason why some man will accept it. Just keep it real. Some simp will put up with you temporarily as long as you give him some of that thing. That's the truth of it. And when men, actual men, call this out against women, they get offended. Why? You're the one who perpetuates your own existence. Don't massacre the definer just because you meet the definition. You're the author of your own story. You're the author of your own duality. You're the author of your own dysfunction, meaning that you're the one who keep writing it in your book. Remember I said the perpetuation of the dysfunction. But nonetheless, like I've said, this duality, it exists, especially in dysfunctions. Usually when men talk about how, she loved me so much, and then she turns it right around and now we have problems. This is because she is operating in a duality of dysfunction. That's the reason why. And it's incumbent upon maybe you or her, if you take her on as a responsibility, for you to point these things out to her and administer the right type of help she needs. If she is resistant against that, then it is best that you separate yourself from that individual, because you can't help anyone who does not want to help themselves. So keep an eye out for those dual-minded dysfunctions, because they could be what separates you from what you want in life. But anyways, like, comment, and share. Check me out on Facebook. Check me out on the good old Patreon. I have not uploaded anything lately, but hopefully I can get maybe 1 or 2 videos in for the Patreon before the end of the month. I think I can. Let's see if we can do it. I don't hold me to promises though. Jeez, life has always got something around the corner for me. But anyways, until next time, this has been the Wolf in Beta Clothes. May you have a good day. And of course, definitely, as you know it, peace be with you.